The Vikings have really started to get their 2018 season back on track. And with that in mind, I want to take a look at 10 things that I believe only Vikings fans will remember. These are things that the rest of the NFL forgot about. But in the Vikings fan circle, in our clique, these things are still remembered. We're going to go through 10 of them, mostly from the 21st century, just because it's a little bit easier to get video content for that. And they're also not going to appear in any specific order. So, let's get right into it. Tuesday night football. That's right, the Vikings actually played a game on Tuesday night, one of the only NFL games to ever be played on a Tuesday night on December 28th, 2010 in Philadelphia against the Eagles, who were led by Michael Vick. The Vikings came into this game banged up. They didn't have Brett Favre. Instead, they started Joe Webb in a game where Joe Webb, in a lot of ways, played like a better version of Michael Vick. Now, granted, he didn't pass for any touchdowns, but he didn't make the same mistakes that Vick did. And in a lot of ways, I always felt like this game showcased where Joe Webb, maybe had some flashes of talent that never actually got executed on just because he didn't actually fit the Vikings offense. There was also a really impressive fumble return for a touchdown by Winfield. This was just a spectacular game, and there aren't many that are ever played on Tuesday nights. Now, moving into another one from a relatively sad season, the 2013 season, when we just could not decide on a quarterback because, quite frankly, none of the ones we had on the roster were any good. On Monday Night Football, we decided that against the Giants, we were going to start the newly acquired Josh Freeman, who, I kid you not, I swore ran maybe 12 different offensive plays all night. He threw the ball 53 times, only completing 20 of his passes, no touchdowns, and an interception. It was the only game that Josh Freeman would start in a Vikings uniform for a very good reason. This is almost a meme among Vikings fans. When Kirk Cousins played his first game, everybody was talking about how he'd passed Josh Freeman's yards and touchdown record as a Minnesota Viking. And then how about the historic quote from Randy Moss, "Straight cash, homie." Now, this actually came after Randy Moss pulled his pants down or, did that sort of celebration against the Packers in a very iconic way, and I'm sure many fans remember that. But what the rest of the NFL does not remember is Randy Moss's conversation that he had with a news reporter that brought us this piece of Vikings gold.
How do you pay, man? If you don't write checks, how do you pay these guys?
Straight cash, homie.
Most of the NFL also does not remember Robert Smith. That's right, he was the Vikings running back for much of the 1990s. He was a first-round pick that played phenomenally well, and even some Vikings fans don't remember this. Prior to Adrian Peterson, Robert Smith was the franchise record holder for most rushing yards in a career as a Viking, and of course, that held up until Adrian Peterson came to town. Now, Smith actually had one of his best years in 2000 and decided to retire from football after only 7 or 8 seasons, and just decided that he was going to get out of the game while he was healthy and do something else with his life. Not many people can say they retire after a Pro Bowl season, their best season, but that's what Robert Smith did. Going back to 2008, an iconic Vikings play that is so often forgotten, a 99-yard touchdown pass featuring two of the most improbable people. This happened at home against the Bears after the Vikings defense made a goal line stand. Gus Frerotte threw a 99-yard touchdown pass to Berrien against his former team. It was just a phenomenal play and something that so many non-Vikings fans would never remember. The 2013 border battle between the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau. And just like what happened in 2018, this thing went into overtime and eventually ended up in a tie. But what you have to remember is the people playing this game, they were not the headliners of Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers. No, this was Christian Ponder facing off against Matt Flynn and Scott Tolzien. Now, how about another one from the late 90s? 1999 brought us a struggling Cunningham. And ultimately, even though, he just brought us so close to the Super Bowl, we did what we had to do and we benched him and replaced him with this sort of journeyman quarterback, Jeff George. Now, when people were having so much excitement over Keenum last year, it really made me think back to Jeff George. This guy had played everywhere. He had not really been very successful. He came to the Vikings. He took over for a struggling quarterback where Keenum took over for an injured quarterback. And he played absolutely lights out. He ended up almost getting us to the Super Bowl. I think we were in the NFC at divisional games, so 2 games away from the Super Bowl, where we lost to the Rams, who would go on to win the Super Bowl, but we gave the Rams an absolute shootout. I mean, Jeff George played like a true gunslinger, and it's really a shame that he's forgotten in Vikings history because he only really did play 1 year. I'm sure only the hardcore fans really remember Jeff George and just the crazy career that he had. Everybody across the league knows the duo of Randy Moss and Chris Carter, but if you're not a Vikings fan, you've probably forgotten all about 3 deep and the third receiver that was so significant to the Vikings' deep ball success. And of course, that was Jake Reed. He played for the Vikings from 1991 to 1999 before finishing up a couple more years with the Saints, back on the Vikings 2001, and then 2002 again with the Saints, kind of bouncing back and forth. It's just a shame that Jake Reed is so forgotten league-wide. I mean, you even take a look at his Wikipedia page, and it's just so relatively blank. And then he came so close to a 7,000-yard career, but he just couldn't quite pull it off. But regardless, one of those significant Vikings receivers that did a lot for the franchise. Then, of course, there's the preseason comebacks of the last 2 years. People say preseason games don't matter, but when it comes to Mike Zimmer's play calling, if you can tie that game up with the 2-minute offense and then go for the 2-point conversion, apparently there's nothing more exciting. And I just feel as a fan, there's nothing more exciting than watching these 3rd and 4th string and inevitably going to get cut guys that are probably playing some of the last games of their career play in the final minutes of a preseason game and put together a comeback. We saw Taylor Heineke do it last year, and this year we saw Trevor Slaughter, who has so much potential, do it this year. So there's been huge things coming about in the ends of these preseason games that, since they're preseason games, are completely forgettable. But to Vikings fans, it's just special to get to watch these guys go out and take these shots. For Jake Wieneke, obviously a Minnesota guy, to make that 2-point conversion this year, I'm sure was a superb highlight to his career. And I'm looking forward to seeing him play for Salt Lake City's AAF team this season. And lastly, the 2010 face-off between the Vikings and the Arizona Cardinals. This was, one of those last games that Brett Favre was playing in his career, but it is one that has not been forgotten by Vikings fans. The Vikings trailed by 2 touchdowns to the Cardinals with less than 4 minutes left in the game, but they spun out one of the greatest comebacks in recent Vikings history, tying the game up and then ultimately winning it with a field goal in overtime. This was a spectacular game in an almost meaningless season. As you know, it was a bad season, but it gave us at least this one good game. So I think we have so much to look forward to here in 2018. There are so many great things that seem like they're on the agenda for the Vikings as they've gotten the season back on track, and I'm excited to see where things go in the coming weeks and months. But let me know if you were surprised by any of these 10 things on the list. Did you remember them all? Or are some of your friends that weren't Vikings fans just absolutely left clueless by these significant moments in Vikings history that only Vikings fans will remember? Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.